All right. I've been teasing you for a while that I was going to be talking about lawsuits. Here we are. I'm going to be talking about two key lawsuits today. And as you probably know by now, I'm Julia. So let's get started. One of the two lawsuits that I'm going to be talking about is the Lau versus Nichols lawsuit in 1974. So in this class action lawsuit, the parents of non-English speaking, Chinese speaking children who were students in the San Francisco Unified School District bought a class action lawsuit because their students were not receiving support to learn English and therefore were not able to access the instruction that was provided. It went on for quite some time, and in 1974, the Supreme Court supported the parents of the children represented by one, Kenny Lau, but it addressed a whole group of students. And they supported the parents' concerns that the children were not achieving equal educational opportunity. And therefore, the district must take affirmative steps. As I've mentioned in previous videos, as legislation then caught up with this lawsuit, the legislation has also affirmed this idea that the school district has to do something. That you can't just say, well, equal is equal. They get the same textbooks, they get the same teacher, it's equal education. Yes, it's equal education, but it's not equal educational opportunity. Just as a student who was blind and were given a print textbook instead of a textbook in Braille can't access the textbook, a child who does not yet speak English cannot access the instruction provided without support. And therefore, the school districts are liable, are responsible for taking proactive steps to identify which students need extra support and providing that support. So huge, very important lawsuit. And later, based upon this lawsuit, the Office for Civil Rights came up with some guidance that they called the Lau remedies. So how do we remedy this problem? Another very important lawsuit was brought about in Texas, and it's known as the Casteneda versus Pickard lawsuit, and this is from 1981. And this also was a very important lawsuit. There's been many, but in terms of changing the requirements for what is provided in education, this is very important because the lawsuit alleged that there was racial discrimination against Mexican Americans. So that falls under the Civil Rights Act because it talks about students of particular race and students of particular national origin. And what they argued was that the kind of discrimination students were facing was ability grouping, and that resulted in segregation. So saying students were not able to do instead of they needed support. There was discrimination in terms of hiring and promotion of faculty and administrators. And then there was a failure to implement bilingual education that would help students overcome language barriers. And therefore would they did not have access to the education that would help them participate equally in education. So you can start seeing with the Lau lawsuit, with the Office of Civil Rights guidance, with the Office for Civil Rights memorandums, with the Equal Educational Opportunities Act, we're seeing very similar type language that if students don't speak English, and schools don't do something about it, then students have limited ability to access education. So what came out of this is what's called the Castaneda standard, which has three parts. And it's a three-part test to evaluate whether a district's program is sufficient. So as you've heard in other videos, I've talked about that there is not a prescription of what programs must be, but instead what they're supposed to do is look at these three things. One is the program based on something that makes sense? Such as an educational theory that's recognized as sound by some experts in the field. So, I mean, it's not a high bar to clear here, folks. Or that it's considered by experts legitimate experimental strategy. Again, not a high bar, but it can't be just something, well, I don't know, let's try it. But hey, is there some rationale for it? And then this is key. Are there sufficient resources and personnel to implement these programs? And we've talked about this in class. And yes, there's staffing limitations. Um, that's why sometimes we say students with disabilities, oh, we won't put them in English in ESL programs. Okay, that's not sufficient. Not having resources and personnel. And then does the school district evaluate and make sure that the programs are doing well?